This is a journey into sound.
Hello and welcome to Podcasty number 12. And as you might notice, that Alan has changed. He's sort of gone into his chrysalis and come out as Gavin. Yeah, I'm afraid Al has basically, due to work and home commitments, has had to take a step back from Podcasty and of Booktube as well. So he's going to be a bit quiet for the moment, but still go and visit his channel and look at his stuff. And it's been a pleasure to work with him doing the podcasty thing for the past year or so. But in his place, I've managed to drag out of deepest, darkest England, Gavin. And if you don't know Gavin, Gavin's from the channel Genre Books, and he talks about everything from pulps to Steinbeck to everything, science fiction, a lot of pulp stuff. He is the Project Gutenberg maestro, I think, because he's delved deeper than I've ever delved into Project Gutenberg. So he has a run of videos of where to find westerns on Project Gutenberg, weird science fiction on there, and many other things. So it's well worth having a look. So here he is, and I say welcome.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, did I cover your channel well enough?
Yeah, I think so. I've tried to do a bit of everything and subsequently achieved very little on the whole project. But yeah,
a bit like me, you just sort of leap around from bit to bit and no focus.
Possibly, yeah.
But I quite like that. I like channels that leap around a lot. I think
I could, if I wanted to, do a sort of like a dedicated channel to one thing or the other, and I'd feel a bit constrained by that.
Yeah, I'd get a bit bored, I think, because I'm not there to sort of hit all the algorithms, so I just do what feels at the time. So here we are. It's in the first episode of Cleaner. So it may be a bit stuttered because we don't know. Well, I know vaguely what I'm doing, I think, but yes, I'm blabbering a bit now. So I thought I'd start with some of the stuff that I've sort of waded through the past month, but it's also, I think, going to coincide with some of the Booktube events that are going on. And if you're just listening to this as a non-Booktube person who don't really watch it, the Booktube events are actually a great way to start reading things you don't normally read. Like at the moment, there's June on the Range on the go, which is it Michael K. Vaughan's?
Yeah.
Started that. And I'm reading Westerns, and I don't normally read Westerns. Occasionally I've done the odd one, so I've just gone down a few Westerns, and I've discovered that 90% of them seem to have the same plot features. Or is it just the ones I'm doing that you have a gunslinger who doesn't want to be a gunslinger anymore, who ends up in a town somewhere that's ruled by some businessman, and he ends up having to ungunsling, and there's an awful lot of those sorts of stories.
There's a bit more to them than that. I mean, I'm 3/4 of the way through my latest Zane Grey, Heritage of the Desert.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a guy who isn't a gunslinger, but he's been taught a little bit. But it's about a Mormon society and someone trying to steal water and rustlers and all sorts. It's covering a lot.
So now I've just read Journal of the Gun Years, Richard Matheson. He wrote about 4 books in the 90s. I've got another one I'm going to read of his. And that's more about how people's perception and publicity almost, it's quite a modern book in that way, change what people think you are compared to what you are. And it's done in a form of a diary. It's really quite an interesting book. But the opening, diary entry of that is masterful, because you read it, and I went back and read it after I read the book, and there's so many bits in that are foreshadowing stuff that you read later on that you don't realize. So much in it, and you can just tell. But then he was such an accomplished writer, especially by the 90s. He'd written so much stuff that he could probably weave half this together in his sleep, I think. And I think that's to me where I said I don't know much about Westerns really. I'm really there, but that's the way when you get somebody like that doing something. As much as I've been reading some Frank Gruber, and I got a thing about Frank Gruber just from stuff when I was a kid, and his stuff was you can tell he knew what he was doing. He knew how to churn out books very quickly and hit certain notes to make them interesting, to make people pick them up. And that's what a lot of the pulp writers did at the time. They just churn them out so quick. But which is the one I've just read? Bitter Sage was what I read. And that was one of these another gunslinger ones. And it starts off a bit, the first couple of pages, you think, and then it just pulls you in. And no matter, you know where it's going, but the storytelling is quick, off the cuff, but it just feels engaging. And that's what he did. He was aiming for certain audiences, and as a lot of the pulp writers, they just pulled them all in.
And you had to with a pulp. There's a definite methodology at play. You know that you can't spend too long introducing landscape or setting. You've got to start with a bang, and hopefully keep it going. Because if you've only got 3,000, 5,000 words, long descriptions of the desert aren't really going to sort of engage your reader. And you got to keep things going so that you write quicker as well. Some of these people were looking, even some of the novelists after the pulps, they're 50,000 words a month, because you'll need to produce a novel a month at least. Some would do more, most would do around about that level. And you've also got to flit between certain genres. So you may have 3 or 4 different pseudonyms. I'm being commissioned to do a couple of westerns. So I've written a couple of westerns. I've now moved over to science fiction. Now I'm doing a crime or a mystery. You've got to be adaptable and take your hooks to make them transplantable, which is why such a lot of early pulp science fictions basically could be a western. You replace the revolver with a laser gun. You replace the desert or the ranch with, a planet off of the main spaceways. You always still you've got mines and sort of caches of treasure. It's all interchangeable, but when it's done well, it's really lovely. I mean, Matheson kept his name when he did all of these different things. So you got Clifford D. Simak did a couple of westerns as well. Everyone pretty much turned their hand to stuff like that at some point.
Yeah, what's interesting is I read a couple of years back Frank Gruber's memoir called The Pulp Jungle, and there's a bit in that. So it's weirdly not that very well written book, but there's a bit in there as him having a deadline, and the following day that he's got to produce this book, and it's him working and saying that 1 o'clock I invented this character, at 1 o'clock this character, 1:30 this character does this, and it's literally him working through his mind about what he's going to do with his character. It was a espionage thriller type thing he was doing, and it was just quite intriguing the way you could tell how the mind was working, how he used to write this stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the pulp writers being able to, it's one hell of a skill to be able to train it. But they needed to do that to survive, to eat, because most of them lived through the Depression, and they were, because in that same memoir, there's stories of him using diluting little bits of tomato ketchup in water as a drink to survive, that he would have got from some place for nothing.
Yeah.
And you think, well, I cannot believe this is an exaggeration, because who would make that up?
If you look at the rates that they were actually paid, sometimes it would go down to, a quarter of a cent a word, but you'd be lucky if you were getting 1 cent a word. This was, the 40s and the 50s. The really depressing thing is now you still see advertisements. We want submissions to our science fiction magazine and stuff. The rate of pay hasn't changed in 70 years.
Yeah, I was reading, I think I saw something yesterday. It was about graphic designer. A graphic designer was saying that in 1999 he was earning about £35,000 a year, and then he went off and retired, and he just looked at the rates of pay for a graphic designer, and they're about the same. So he said in 25 years they've not changed.
Yeah.
And I think it's very similar for writing, that the rates, which is why I don't think you really get as many full-time writers as you used to get. Most of them are not full-time writers; they cannot afford to be.
Yeah, I mean, some of those old pulp writers held down normal jobs as well. Others sort of lived by the pen, and these are the guys who could churn out 1 million words a year. Max Brands and what have you. But most people still did it as an extra little bit of sideline cash. You'd be very. I mean, the thing is, it's never been easier to write. You can do it anywhere.
Yeah,
you can publish yourself. There are so many other outlets in order to publish. But by the same stretch, you now have to be your own PR department. There's none of the support network for writers that there would be. There are very few copy editors on the sharp end of the publishing world. Obviously, once you get to the established traditional houses, that becomes a bit more apparent. But even there, you are expected to do your bit. You cannot be a reclusive author these days.
Yeah, I personally believe that editing quality has degenerated in the past 20 years.
Yeah,
even in mainstream, even like people at the big publishers like Penguin and stuff. And I just think people need good editors, and can actually help almost create a book if you get help point the author in a correct direction. And I just
I mean, there's the two levels of the editing. I notice more printing errors in the higher class publications than previously. There've always been printing errors on the cheaper end of things, because that sort of copy editing job is the first to get cut back. But I do wonder if is it an editor thing, or is it a value for money thing? We're doing one of the Booktube events this summer, big book summer.
Yeah.
There are many more big books than there used to be.
Oh yes, definitely.
And some of them really don't need to be that big. But if I'm going to spend £10 on a new book, or 11 or 12, however much it is now, even I'm thinking, I'll pick something up and it's 300 pages long, or I'll pick something up and it's 750 pages long. What am I going to get more out of? I know I'll get a longer time out of one book over the other, but am I going to enjoy that as much as something which may be 250 pages long, but absolutely tight and spare and delivering what I need?
See, proportionally, I'm trying to work out. I was thinking this the other week about book prices, because in the early 80s, so I was 12, 13 years old, and I was buying books. I was going into bookshops, Smiths, and bookshops, and I was picking up books, and I didn't have huge amounts of money, pocket money I was given it, but I would quite happily pick up a novel, a Heinlein novel, an Asimov novel, and I'd be able to easily afford one. Now I look at a paperback book, and you're averaging between £10 and £20 depending on it, and I'm thinking, and even me, I sit there and think, that's a lot of money for a paperback book. So has proportionally the cost of them gone up, or is it just me being an old man saying that's expensive?
Everything's gone up.
Yes,
but
I mean, compared to earnings and things.
Oh no, the earnings haven't gone up, but obviously everybody else still needs to get paid down the line. So, I mean, I'm not a publishing expert, but the amount of frippery that goes on with it. It used to be, you know what? If I'm advertising my book, I sort of get it into these periodicals.
Yeah,
someone's going to review it. Done. Now you've got to send out advanced copies. You've got to send out advanced reader copies. You've got to build the momentum, which means going out to lots more people, doing lots more work in a much more crowded space to make yourself heard for presumably less rewards. So if I'm only going to sell 5,000 copies of a hardback, I better be pricing it at £25, £30. But at the same time, if you're pricing it at £25-30, you're going to have a whole bunch of people go, I'm not spending that amount of money.
Which then comes down to all the special editions that certain authors do. They do loads of different special editions, especially sort of the YA market seems to do loads of them.
And
I can understand authors trying to make a living, so I can understand
people
it.
do that if they want. People can collect those if they want. And if you've got sprayed edges or special covers or all of this stuff, it really is all surface. What I've seen some writers do is in America, there's a special edition in Borders shops where there was an extra chapter.
Oh,
that's not right. But because of course this comes out after the first edition, so people, the real fans, have gone out and bought this, and now they find, oh, here's a bit where it's got extra info or more characterization or a little side quest or something, and the true aficionados will feel they have to get it
because they've always been like certain books you would get sort of somewhere down the line, somebody's written a short story that goes with that book and it's in some anthology somewhere. But this is like, sounds almost like it's targeted specifically to do this.
It's exactly what it is, and I've got no problem with people writing more material about the worlds or the stories that they've created. And if it turns up in an anthology alongside half a dozen or a dozen other people doing the same thing, I think that's probably a good thing, because that is going to expose readers who have bought it for one writer. It's going to expose them to an awful lot more. Just doing it for, you're limiting it geographically, because there are no borders, for example, in these parts.
Yes.
If they do one in Waterstones, they're going to have the same problem in the States. And then people will feel, if they really have to get it, then they've then got to spend exorbitant amounts on getting something shipped.
Because like signed editions, I've never seen so many signed editions now that get produced. What's that book up there? Raymond Feist, one of his last books, Master of Furies, beginning of a new one. I've actually got the signed edition because basically it was about £1 more than the normal edition, so to get his signature in it. But it seems to be that that's the thing now, is signed editions. But there's so many signed editions, you think that makes the ones with a signature in are not that rare.
Yeah, it's become more of a production line.
Like I've got a Harlan Ellison book with his signature in it, which I found by accident. And I know that that's quite rare because he didn't really sign books. He was not that sort of man.
He didn't like people.
No, he didn't. Yeah. And basically, this is a secondhand book I picked up from a shop in Frome in the 80s. A secondhand bookshop there. And it had the signature. It said Harlan Ellison. I just assumed it was somebody scribbled in there. And since then, I've done checks on it, and it looks like a proper Harlan Ellison signature. I've never had it verified, but from all the pictures I've seen of his signature, it looks like it. So somehow it made its way into Frome in Somerset.
I did my work experience in Frome. I worked at the music shop for 2 weeks.
Good old Frome. I've got a friend that lives there now, so I haven't been there for years. But I used to have some great secondhand bookshops. I've got a load of stuff from there.
But yeah, the signed editions is symptomatic of this, because you would get a signed edition by an author visiting a bookshop and signing your copy, and you bought a copy, so everybody won. These days they have these tip-in sheets, so sort of established writers.
Oh yes, all the
are given 1,000, 1,500 sheets. Just sign all of them, so it just becomes part of the production line. I like signed editions, but if it's got an indelible sticker on the cover saying signed edition, that does sort of tarnish it a little bit.
Yeah,
I like finding them by accident. I did get an eBay lot one time, and I think someone just didn't realise. And there was about half a dozen books in there that were signed, including like a Fred Pohl. So I enjoyed that.
The Family of the Vordelak, which I'm got a video ready to come out on, which is a weird Alexei Tolstoy vampire novella. And I watched, there was a recent French film of it, but then I discovered also that the film Black Sabbath, that Black Sabbath are named after, which is an anthology film, one of the bits of that is the same story, and there's a couple other things in it. But it's literally a vampire story written about 50 years, I think, before Bram Stoker, but there was lots of vampire stories before, because it's ancient legends, but it's about this guy from the French court who ends up staying in this Serbian sort of family's hut, and they and the father goes out and says, because he's hunting this Turkish raider, saying, if I'm not back in 10 days, I won't be back, but if I return after those 10 days, don't let me in. And it's basically just a vampire story. But the film, the French film, was produced 2024, is weirdly gothic-y, some weird puppet sex is all I can describe it as, that you've never seen. Strange. It's a strange French film, but it's got obviously made on hardly any budget, but it's really, really got this sort of atmosphere to the whole of it.
You shouldn't need a big budget to make a horror film.
No, and it's literally, you can tell it's all made in the same place, and they've done it's all closely shot. They've obviously not got much. They obviously didn't have lots of lighting, so they've done it all in natural light, even in nighttime scenes. But it's just really, really well put together. And if anybody ever gets a chance to see it, and I said it's called the Vordelak, actually, and the original story is the family of the Vordelak. And I like finding these sort of weird old stories that something later on has come from.
Yeah.
And this was Tolstoy's, this was Leo Tolstoy's cousin, I think it was. And apparently he wrote a few other gothic-y type things as well, which I might have to find out. And I said, I've got a video coming out on it, hopefully this week. I'm just late on doing it. And there's a couple of translations around you can buy translations. The one I got was a free translation. Some lady on a blog, she actually didn't realize there was translation, so she found the original text and herself translated it from the French, because it was written in French, and put it up as a free thing for people to take copies of. And her translation, it reads pretty good, so doesn't read badly. So she's obviously, to me, she's done a pretty good job of the translations. And I know translation is quite a hard skill to do to get the feeling of the text across. So it's always quite interesting. I always find it, whenever I read a translation, I always sit there and think, so is this how the original felt or not? And you can never know unless you speak the language.
Yeah, I don't know much about like famous translators. I mean, the one that springs to mind is William Weaver, who translates a lot of things from Italian. And I know that because I read a lot of Umberto Eco books. And I think if they have the same translator again and again and again, they must be doing something right, because they've obviously been good enough to retain the job. When you're sort of reading something cold without knowing what the original might be like, then you just got to see if you enjoy it.
I've got a book of Greek science fiction short stories, and it's all translated by the same woman. And the stories, some of them are really interesting, but they've all got the same feel to them. So you're not getting totally 100% the originality of each author, I don't think. It could be the length of the stories. It could be just the fact that she's translating them all. But there's some really, really quite interesting stories in the whole thing. And it's still worth a read. But that was the feel I got when I read it. Was it all felt a similar sort of style, which I suppose when you're translating it, you're going to have a style. You're going to pick up on certain things to a degree.
Yeah, you will have your own idioms that you will use to translate the idioms from the target language.
Yeah, I can't remember what that book's called, but I was in search. I thought there's got to be some Greek science fiction around. And I went in search of it and found this book of short stories. And said it is quite interesting. And I think there's so much like American, British, Western science fiction. Trying to find other stuff can be quite difficult. I think there's a lot more coming now from sort of India and places like that compared to what they used to be. But trying to find stuff that's been translated into English can be difficult. There's some really good Eastern European stuff that doesn't get translated as well, apparently. So it's just trying to find them and find the translations. And this all comes back to what we were saying earlier about publishing, the cost of publishing. Is it worth the cost of employing a translator for some niche sort of Eastern European science fiction book that's probably going to not sell huge amounts?
And the answer, I'm afraid, is no.
Yeah.
And then the answer to that is people will rely on technology to solve that issue, and it really will not be as good.
Yeah. But yes, that's always the thing. Because the other thing I discovered that there's another. These are all the sort of weird rabbit holes. I don't know. Another subgenre of science fiction I didn't know called solar punk. I think everybody puts punk at the end of everything to make it, and which I'm quite intrigued about because it's like positive science fiction. It's about sort of obviously about renewables and bits like that, but it's all meant to be sort of positive and sort of life affirming. The future is going to be good, and maybe sort of Star Trek-ish in that way. And I'm quite intrigued to read some of it.
Yeah, Star Trek or the culture from Ian M. Banks and all these sort of post-scarcity universes.
Because there's so much dystopian stuff out there. It's nice to sort of find something that's a bit more life affirming.
I get it. I know why there's,
Yeah.
Because if you're writing science fiction to reflect the world around you, and things are pretty dystopic, and also from a narrative, from a reader grabbing point of view, utopian novels, it's like, well, isn't everything absolutely wonderful? That's got no hook to it at all.
I remember reading a anthology of short stories. I can't remember who it was by, because I've probably read it in the 80s. But I remember the bit at the beginning of it was the story that somebody had asked the author to write a utopian one, and he was going how hard it was to actually write a proper utopian story, because in a utopia everything's perfect. So, and stories rely on conflict and problems.
Yeah, which is why some of the best dystopic ones are books where on the surface everything is a utopia. So if you've got something like, there are people that most of the people in Brave New World absolutely loved it in that world. The same with something like The Question Mark by Muriel Jaeger, or I don't know. I should imagine some people even enjoyed it in the world of 1984, Happy Little Citizens.
Yes, probably in the probably the ones at the top.
Yeah,
not all the pros.
But narratively, it's a much harder sell for something where everything is absolutely brilliant. And I think if you've got something like solar punk literature, then you will find that there are still struggles within that. Either sort of maintaining the status quo or trying to achieve something better.
Yeah, if you have like original Star Trek and even Next Generation, 99% of the conflict comes from outside rather internally. And that's how they sort of got over that. I know it's sort of changed in some of the later ones. If you look at something like Discovery, a lot of it's internal conflict, though you'd argue with Discovery whether that's really traditional sort of Star Trek anyway.
Well, it didn't take long for that to happen with Deep Space Nine. All it takes is for you taking over this wrecked space station, and the replicators don't work, and within 24 hours, everyone's at each other's throats.
Yeah,
you've got a bunch of characters who don't like each other.
Yeah,
initially.
Yes, Deep Space Nine is probably my favourite of all of them, I think. Though the ending was a bit disappointing, I thought, but
I haven't got to the ending yet.
Yeah, no, that's probably me. Everybody else loves it, but I just was a little disappointed in it. But it's worth it just for all the conflicts going up to it, and it's worth it for Andrew Robinson playing Garrick.
Yeah, he's great.
Who's absolutely fantastic. Who took me years to realise that he's actually the killer in Dirty Harry, the serial killer in Dirty Harry. Once you know that, you can just see it in his face immediately.
And Odo's the original Reverend from MASH.
Oh yeah,
from the film.
Yes, I forgot that. Yeah,
I
totally
and
forgot.
Avery Brooks was in something before, but was it Hawk or something? But I don't think it ever got to Britain to be on TV. So nobody knew who he was, but lots
Nobody
of
knew
people
who he
in
was.
America did.
I always argued with my wife. I said, I think that any actor, once they played a part that everybody knows, shouldn't be allowed to ever act in anything again, because because when they play something else, you immediately see them as that famous character.
Okay, you'd have never had Christopher Lee as Saruman.
True,
because he'd still be Dracula. You'd never have had him in The Wicker Man.
Yeah,
or James Bond, or Star Wars.
True. That's where my argument totally falls down. Christopher Lee can poo-poo any argument. You never would have had his symphonic metal Charlemagne.
I listened to a bit of that. Guy could sing.
Yeah, he could. I have that album, and it's.
I didn't like it enough to buy the album.
No,
but enough to appreciate what he was doing.
There's certain bits of it, and you think, okay, this is totally, absolutely over the top. But hey, it's Christopher Lee.
Yeah, he's not always there with the nuance.
So, have you read anything that's been sort of perked your interest?
Well, yes, because I've been co-hosting June on the Range this year.
Yes.
Very happy to be asked to do that. So this last week, I've read a bunch of Piccadilly Cowboys books. So Edge by George G. Gilman, so that's number 7 in the series. The First of Jubal Cade by Charles R. Pike. The First of Breed by James A. Muir. And Herne the Hunter 2, River of Blood. Now, these are all sort of hyper-violent 70s westerns, and all written by Brits.
Yes, I remember as a kid, all used to see in like westerns. You used to see Edge ones, and is they by J.T. Edson, or is that a different?
J.T. Edson's different. He's a little bit before. He's a little bit separate, but he is also
British. Isn't he?
He's British. Yeah,
I used to see all those books. Used to always be in. You used to go to a railway station. They'd always have tons of them.
And I get it, because if you've got a long commute, you can pull it. I pushed each of these off in a day. They're very slight. They're a little bit formulaic, but I do like them. Yeah, and these guys are like the pulp writers. There's one of these coming out each month. I don't think any of those author names are the actual names of the writers. So some are pseudonyms, some are like house names. So Lawrence James gave George G. Gilman like his break by saying, I want sort of 4 original westerns as part of the series. And then Lawrence James ends up writing parts of some of those series. So Lawrence James was also a romance writer. Under his own name, he did some science fiction. So he's got those Simon Rack books. So these are guys that can turn their hand from genre to genre, but also, they absolutely treat it like an industry. So there's not always great artistry on display, but there's always, a competent level of craftsmanship, which is, it's just as important. So a lot of those, continuing with Zane Grey for June on the Range. So I've been doing a project where I'm reading a whole bunch of Zane Grey books. It's 50 Zanes of Grey, I'm calling it. I'm just going through at least 50 of his work, starting at the beginning, where it's a little bit more historical, a bit more about the frontier rather than just the West. A couple of weeks ago, I read The Oregon Trail from the 1840s, talking about sort of experiences on the frontier. It's non-fiction memoir diary. It's that was really good, and a lot more planned for the rest of June as well. So, doing a buddy read with Roy from Roy Reads Anything. We're doing Hop Along Cassidy. So my first ever Hop Along Cassidy book, which is apparently the books are a lot more adult centric than the films and the TV series that came after, which are sort of targeted at kids. So the character's quite different. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end up reading more westerns than I was planning to. I've just sort of gone down a little thing. I had a look on our library, their online catalogue yesterday to see what they had, and the joys of living on an island, we have very little there. I searched under westerns, and they had 20 books down there, and they didn't have one Zane Grey at all, which I was amazed at. And then I narrowed it down, and the ones that they seemed to have that were vaguely interesting were some written in about 2007. They're called the Black Horse ones. They had a few of those, which I don't know if they're any good. They were written by, I can't remember the name of the author, so I was probably going to reserve one of those. Audio-wise, I had a look at their audio-wise, and actually the other one they had was The Revenant. They had the book of that, and they had audio-wise, they had the, was it The Year of the Dog? Or something about the dog.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I had an audio of that. But yeah, very limited, only about sort of 20 books. But the main ones I said were the Black Horse ones. I had about 4 or 5 of those. And I thought, and I had to do a wee bit of research, and written in 2007, and the guy was wrote a load of them. I don't think he's written anything recently, but I don't know whether they're good or
Black
anything.
Horse books are targeted to libraries.
Oh, interesting.
So the way they're produced, those hardbacks where the cover is printed.
Yes.
So there is no dust jacket. It's meant for durability. The font is a little bit larger. In my local library, they have hardly any westerns now. They used to have shelves of westerns 20, 30 years ago, but the target audience has passed on.
Yeah.
What are left are ones that are in sort of large print. But westerns can get quite addictive. There are some people who read nothing but them. Obviously, less now than previously, but some people pick their horse and stick with it.
It's a bit like romance bonds, though, isn't it? It's the Mills and Boone thing. A lot of people start reading those, and that's all they end up reading. Fair play, if that's what they like. And that's why they sort of do so well, is because people just go onto them.
And that is another, it's not a genre I read, but it's a genre that runs on the same lines. I think there used to be a Mills and Boone formula, no sex before page 67 sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was, they're quite strict. Badger books, for example, from Lionel Fanthorpe.
Good old Lionel Fanthorpe.
All of those books are 157 pages.
Yeah.
Because that was just like the production line at Badger was crazy. It's just like, well, this is the design of the book. This is how many pages are going to be in the book. Here is the cover picture we've chosen.
Now write a story about that cover, yeah.
For the one coming out in 2 months' time. Get to it. And he would. And I think that guy has possibly more pseudonyms than anybody else.
I just remember him when he was presenting the 14 Times TV set show.
I think that's where I first sort of became aware of him, yeah.
And he was like, yes, I am a real reverend. And he was.
He was a real everything. He was a real everything.
Yeah.
He's
really
done
interesting guy.
I think people are just generally curious about lots of things and get involved with lots of things. And you find them in the oddest places. Brian Blessed is one.
Yeah.
James Robertson Justice was another. Lots of the older, if we go back to even like Christopher Lee, there you go. So he's acting, he's writing, he's he's singing.
It feels
And-
very
and
very
he's-
Victorian gentleman. Like, I've got interest in all these things, doesn't it? Almost.
Yeah, it's a little bit like a dilettante. It's but I think it's just having fun doing what you want.
Yeah.
But also coming from a background where you spent a part of your early life doing exactly what you were told, because all of these guys had served in the army as well.
Yeah, most of them have been to public schools as well, so they've just spent a lot of time being told you do this, this, and this, and
you are surrounded by success. You were told
Yeah.
about how alumni from the school have done X, Y, and Z.
And this is almost a rebellion.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the amount of people that became actors or writers, that the family were not particularly happy about it. And sometimes it is, like you say, you got another job, and all of a sudden something you've written becomes a huge success. Okay, I can actually go and do what I want to do.
So, anything other than westerns? Or was it just been your western bit?
Yeah, there must have been things other than westerns. But I am. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm doing. So I've got a video coming out tonight. So this is Sunday. On a very early Gothic romance. So it's from 1793 by Eliza Parsons, The Castle of Wolfenbach. So I did a buddy read with someone who's a Cat Jack, who's a commentator on my channel and plenty of other channels. We read this. This is the first book of about 7 I want to read this year. This is the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen. These 7 books are mentioned by one of Jane Austen's characters in Northanger Abbey as being horrid novels. I thought, I want to read horrid novels. And it's an interesting book. And she has an interesting backstory herself, the writer. She started writing out of necessity in her 50s. So I think that there was a family business. They were okay. They were established. They were fairly well off. All of a sudden, in the space of 18 months, I think her eldest son, who's in the army, dies. The warehouse for their business burns down, and there's no insurance. On the back of all of this, her husband has a couple of strokes, and then he passes away. All of a sudden, she's left with the remaining kids and needing to find a way to support them. So for the next 17 years, she churned out sort of 19 novels and a play. And this is the second of her novels. And she just picked what was fashionable at the time. If it could have been, she could have ended up writing sensation novels 30 years later, but she went for Gothic horror. So it's not a perfect book by any stretch, but it's really interesting. And there is another one of hers on this short list of books, which I'll be getting to later during the year. So I've started on that journey. I'm still ploughing through the 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. That's going to take over probably about another year. I'm rereading something, which I don't often do. So I've reread Ian M. Banks' Consider Phlebas.
Yeah, I read that. That would have been 30 years ago. I remember reading that. I remember not liking it. And I can't remember why I didn't like it. Because I've read some of his non-science fiction stuff. The Crow Road I really like. Wasn't so keen on the Wasp Factory, but some of his other stuff I've really liked. But his science fiction, for some reason, I didn't really get on with. I read some of his short stories and it didn't pull me as well.
I like them.
I might have to revisit them at some point.
Talking about a utopian society, the culture is post-scarcity utopian. AIs are running everything, but they're running it well, and they get on with the humans. But obviously, stuff still happens because it's a dark and scary universe. But this is like the first of those books where the culture, which is the bit I really enjoy about those books, is the antagonist, and we're following another character. It is very it's surprisingly pulpy and space opera. If you go into it thinking hard science fiction, you're going to be disappointed. But it really sort of like it is big spectacle followed by big spectacle followed by big spectacle. All of these big set pieces happen continually throughout the book. It's quite fun.
Yeah, it's one I said probably be on my list at some point to reread, because I find it quite amazing that when you go back to stuff that you didn't like and end up liking it, it's always quite interesting. I think it's just how you change, and maybe it's just to do with the quantity of stuff you read, and then makes you sort of more receptive to slightly different styles and things. I think there's a lot to do with it, because from what I remember about it, it was a very different style to everything else I was reading at the time.
It's fairly dense
in
its style. But I think maybe if you were to reread it now, you go back and you look at it and go, "Oh, I can see where this concept or idea or way of doing things has come from." 25 years later, I'm spotting things I never would have done.
Yeah.
Between that and all of the rereading and the stuff coming up, and I've got my other longer project called Project Rabbit Hole, where I'm going through lots of Hollow Earth stuff and Secret Society stuff and Atlantis stuff. It's sort of a magnet for all the sort of esoteric and bordering on the occult kind of things that are coming my way. And next month is Rocket Summer, and I'm going to indulge sort of that side of things as well, because I've got Lost Continents and Hollow Earth and War over Lemuria, which is very much about old science fiction and Lost World. So Lemuria stroke Atlantis, and this is a whole bunch of stories that are produced by or written by Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer, who was the editor at, I can't remember which magazine it was. Amazing Stories. Started printing all of these. And I've got 7 of the 8 volumes of the collected short stories to plow through. And people thought, well, this is a bit of fun. It turns out that the author may really have thought this was actually happening. And I'm hopefully over the next couple of months going to sort of unravel this a bit and see where I can get to with it. It's a classic case of biting off more than I can chew, I think.
Yeah, I said I've got some stuff that's I was doing some stuff on overpopulation that I'd like to continue with. It's just I've just not got around to it, and I need to organise better. I need to find better ways to organise myself, because I'm not doing how I'd like to do it at the moment. And I get distracted. I think, oh, that's interesting. And I go down that train, and then something else gets put to the sideline. So I need to have better systems to organise myself, to know what I'm doing, and not to stick with stuff just so that I know what's going on. And I have notes everywhere. I have notes on the computers, notes on bits of paper, and it's...
You just have a series arc. Yeah. Look at it in the long term.
Look at the long term. I have a series arc.
Well, this is what the playlists in YouTube before. I just sort them away. So this is, I keep all my tags in one place. I keep all of the, silly stuff like book hauls and bits out and about in another place. And then it's like, well, okay, here's my Western ones. Here's all the ones for this particular Booktube event. And you can't do it all, but you can give it a good try.
Yeah. I wasn't planning on doing any events over the summer, because I sometimes get and then I thought, okay, let's read one Western. And now I'm going to the point that I'm going to read at least 4 or 5, probably more time, because there's like the Sage one that I read that Friday. That was it. On Friday I read it, and I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night, so I finished it in the middle of the night. Nice for a bit of insomnia. Finish a Western. And that said they're only about, she said they're really short, 120-ish pages, I think.
Yeah. Most
of them seem to average around about. So there, and then I thought, and then Summer Trek's on. Summer Trek goes on for 3 months. It's over summer. It used to be 1 month, and it's Reverend Reeds started it. So everybody pop across and give him some love. And I was thinking, okay, let's just do 1 or 2 books. And I'm thinking, oh, I'd like to read that, and I'd like to read that. And then I'm going down this William Shatner rabbit hole at the moment, which is quite entertaining. This book actually it's ended up being over 400 pages. If you're listening to this, it's William Shatner's Star Trek Academy, and it's called Collision Course. And there was meant to be a series of them, but they only did 1 of them. And I have a feeling it's because they got a Star Trek Academy series coming out that they decided to produce it and told me they couldn't produce any more. And it's co-written with, what were their names? Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, who've done a lot of Star Trek stuff. It is really good work. It's really, really well written. I get the feeling that from what I've read over the years that Shatner comes in with some ideas and stuff, and then the authors go off and just do their thing with it, and he just checks it and says, yes, that's fine, awesome. Yeah.
So is this recent from him then?
Yes, this was 2000 this book was 2007-ish.
Okay.
Well, a newish one. And I said, the fact that it's a Star Trek book that's over 400 pages long as well, which is quite unusual because I've got loads of the normal ones in there. Most of them averages sort of 200, 250 pages, sort of average size paperback. And if you get to the ones from the 70s and that, they're always a lot shorter, even still. So to have one that long, but it sort of focuses on Kirk and Spock before they first meet, and then they sort of meet, and before he goes in the academy, they're sort of rewriting his history again, as they always do in these books. But it's really well written. It's got me going there. It feels, when you picture stuff in your head about what the characters are, in my head, I seem to be picturing the sort of Kelvin timeline of Star Trek. Sort of the newer, the J.J. Abrams one. That's what my brain is sort of interpreting it as, not as like the original Trek. And that's the sort of Kirk, and that seems to come. That's the sort of feel it gives me. But I said to you, it's really good. It's it's not high literature or anything, but it's really sort of bowling along. The plot's got me thinking and going places I wasn't expecting.
This is similar to pulp authors. So if you are an IP author, you are working to diktat. You are really hidebound by what you can. I mean, there's pluses to that because you are not going to be doing. You're not in charge of your own publicity, although you will be expected to turn up at conventions and what have you. But you won't be sort of giving any sort of clues away or anything like this, and you will have to be on your feet when you are producing the work. Because if you take something like Star Wars, Star Trek at the moment as well, actually, they are really sort of flooding the zone with lots of series and spin-offs and what have you, because they're trying to get every little bit of cash out of their relative investments. But if you are working on, or you have been asked to do a series of books about a particular sort of side character in one of these franchises, and then they've suddenly decided to make a series about it, your books end up on the scrap pile. Because, this character can't be doing that because he's now off in this part of the universe doing, X, Y, Z. You've got to be a very disciplined writer, I think, in the same way that the pulps would have to be. You've got to be able to sort of put a shift in and treat it like a 9 to 5.
It's quite. Everybody gets obsessed with canon. What is canon, and does it follow things? If you look at the sort of history of Star Trek spin-offs, the comic, when it continued after the film, they were told basically you can do whatever you like as long as Luke Skywalker doesn't fight Darth Vader, and that all the characters end up at the beginning of the next film exactly the same place as you left them. That was it. So the stories in the original comic sort of continuations are really, really bizarre and strange in a good way. And they did manage to get Luke to fight Darth Vader, because they did one. It did, and it ended up. So they had a big splash on the front cover of Luke fighting Darth Vader, and it ends up it's not actually him. It's all sort of imaginary thing, and that's how they did it. And then you have the famous Jackson, the 6-foot rabbit alien creature, because the people who were writing it didn't really know that much about science fiction. They thought, oh, a big rabbit, that'll do. It's fun, but it's fun. And then you have some novels as well. You had this bunch of Han Solo at Star's End. I think Lando Calrissian ones, about 3 or 4 novels around that time, and they don't seem to give a hoot about what's canon and what's not canon, and that makes them far more interesting, because people take these characters and they do interesting things with them.
But so I mean, those Star's Edge ones, and those are from like the late 70s, early 80s.
Yes,
people were just grateful to get any content
Yes.
and would lap it up. These days, people feel ownership over something that they watched in their childhood and will criticize anything that doesn't adhere to their strict interpretation of canon. I mean, this
I have
is
a feeling that if the Timothy Zahn Thrawn books that he did, which were basically sequels to Return of the Jedi, came out now, that people would have a go at them. He got permission to do them, and it was like the first thing anybody'd heard from Star Wars stuff since Return of the Jedi, because it'd been quiet for years. Nobody's really produced anything, so everybody was just grateful to have something, and they're actually very good books, the follow-ons. But the way the atmosphere around these things, as you said, is now, people said have ownership and want things to go a certain way, and lose it if it doesn't go the way they want to.
And when I'm a little bit bored, I'll spend 5 minutes searching through YouTube, picking channels that I don't want notifications from, based on what they say in their titles. Because I'm sorry, you don't own it. You don't write anything. You sit there professionally bitching about something. Have a little more positivity. Be a little more open-minded, if you don't mind.
See, my theory is, if I don't like, Star Trek Discovery is quite a good one. A lot of people really despise that. I started watching it after it was things, and in my little brain, I've managed to sort of focus it as it's Star Trek, but it's in a totally different universe than the rest of Star Trek, because it doesn't really fit to me. And you just sort of, so it's like Star Trek adjacent. And then if you do that, you can enjoy it if you think it's different. But my thing is, well, if you're not liking it, don't watch it, don't read it, don't.
Well, it's because they will get more people paying attention to them if they tell everyone they don't like something, rather than if they tell everyone they do.
Like that, isn't there?
The trouble is, the poor writers stuck in the middle begin to suffer.
Yes, and people won't write for these things because they don't want to get the abuse online.
And then you're only going to have the people that are giving out the abuse, trying to, fill the gap. So the next Star Wars film is just going to be 2 hours of X-Wings attacking the Death Star, and Princess Leia has to stay in a metal bikini all the way through. Yeah,
if another Star Wars example is Rogue One, I don't particularly like that as a film. I don't think it quite works. But what's come off that...
We can have differences there.
Yeah, but what's come off that is Andor, and Andor is absolutely stunningly done, and it is excellent. But yeah, no, I'm not a fan. I like it more than I did when I first saw it. But then one of my issues with it is, in my brain, this goes back to canon, I'm a big fan of if you remember the radio series they produced in the early 80s, they had a different way of the plans getting finding the plans, because they did, within the radio series, they had extra bits, and the extra bits was how the plans came into R2D2, and they had a different way of it happening. And I've always had that in my brain as that's how it happened. So when Rogue One came out and totally rewrote that, my brain has problems twisting it. And I think that's always, and I've always accepted that that's probably why my perception of that film is a bit less. But you just, move on. And I understand why people love it. I do understand why people like it, because it was different to everything else. But then I love The Last Jedi. I think The Last Jedi was really good because they did something different.
Yeah.
And people absolutely hate it, but frothing at the mouth about it. But Ryan Johnson did something different. But yeah, you've just got to accept it, because otherwise you won't get directors like him doing stuff like that. And without Rogue, you got to think Rogue One was Gareth Edwards technically did it, but Tony Gilroy ended up redoing it, from what I can understand, and I think he did most of it.
Yeah, I think there were some reshoots.
A load of reshoots, and he put it all together. But because of that, we ended up with Andor, and said Andor is just excellent.
But then this is, directing an IP film. Is going to end up like writing an IP book.
Yeah. But the interesting thing about Andor is, I
franchise. We love what you're doing, and we're going to change it all.
Yeah.
Because we need this character to survive, because we've got a series coming up.
But the interesting thing I think about Andor is the fact that I think you could go in and watch it and have not seen any Star Wars whatsoever, and still, because it relates more to sort of World War II dramas about resistance and the underground than anything else in some ways.
But that's what you want. You want to please your existing audience,
but you don't want to do the same thing over and over again.
You can't have to enjoy this series, here is our set reading texts that you have to know, and you have to know all about. I don't know anything about Thrawn. I didn't read the books. I understand he turns up in one of the series coming up, and I know he's blue. That's enough. That's the extent of my knowledge. So I'm just thinking, right, evil Smurf. He's in an Imperial uniform. I know he's a bad guy. I can read the semiotics of the situation.
Yeah.
I find that there is very little sort of just people trying to appreciate what people are doing for them, and instead, just being ready to complain about any and everything. And I think that goes beyond just the entertainment world.
It's also part of the reason why, when I review and talk about books, I very rarely talk about a book that I didn't like. And even if I talk about a book that I don't like, I would talk about it in positive terms, because no matter what, somebody's put effort into this.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody, the same way I don't think anybody goes out to make a bad film, I don't think anybody goes out to write a bad book. Even if they're just being paid, they're doing it for the money, they're still not going to go out to write a bad book. And they obviously, and somebody's put effort into this, and there's all the people behind it's put effort in there. And you can criticize something without totally going over the top and ranting about it and basically insulting people.
Yeah.
And there's ways of doing stuff.
Occasionally,
good criticism is an art form in some ways. And so many people don't realize that if you say, I don't like something, you can't just say, I don't like it because I hate it, they've done this, this, and this. That is not criticism. Criticism is saying, I don't like this, but this is why I don't like this, and this is why this doesn't work.
Yeah, not endless videos of how it should have ended.
Yes.
Is that, well, no, you don't get. Do you know what? No, I'm not even saying you don't get to write it. You do get to write it. Here's a pen. Yeah. Here's some paper. Zip your mouth and show us what you've got. Occasionally, I will trash a book. I would normally make sure the author's dead. Because people don't set out to fail. Sometimes things do fail. These huge corporate behemoths, if you've got a Disney or a Paramount behind you, you will likely not be allowed to fail. There is always a danger of trying to please everybody and therefore annoying everybody. If someone said, do you want to work on the next series of Doctor Who, I'd run a mile. I mean, I love that. I love Doctor Who, but whatever you do, you're not going to please people.
I think that's part of the reason why the guy left, I think. Why he didn't stay around for longer. I think he enjoyed what he was doing, but he decided that he didn't want to stay there too long because of the amount of criticism, the amount of what you do in that program.
Exactly. Why would you want to? You are the face for anything that anyone perceives as wrong with it, so you take all the flack. It's taken 9 months of your year working on just the one series, which means you can't take any other jobs. It's you're always going to be on a hiding to nothing, because something with 60 years of history behind it is definitely not going to please people. And if you do stick around, you end up typecast. So you're not going to please anybody.
I don't think you're ever going to end up with somebody of, say, the sort of distance of Tom Baker or even David Tennant, and again in that role. I think you're going to be lucky for people to do 2 years worth, a couple of seasons worth.
Yeah.
Just because, as you said, it's harder than it used to be, just because of all the just how under the spotlight you are.
You'll need to get you'd either need to get an established actor who's always wanted to do this, who absolutely loves it and wants to stick there for a few years, and then you're not going to sell as much merchandise to a younger audience, or you get in a really young person, and anyone over the age of 35 thinks that they're too young to be that old. And those people, yes, they may, run all those risks I've mentioned. They're either going to be typecast, they'd be too associated with it, and psychologically being, the face of everyone's eye for everything that might go wrong with it is going to cause an issue. And you're expected in a role like this somehow, God knows how, to be an arbiter of what is socially acceptable as well.
I know.
In an increasingly polarized society.
No. The thing is, I've really enjoyed these Doctor Who's. I must admit, I've not watched the finale yet, so don't tell me what.
Me neither. I'm a little bit behind, but I've seen the first few of this recent series. I much prefer it to the first series.
Yeah. But him as a Doctor has come across really, really well.
He's really good.
Yeah. I think from the weird Christmas episode and everything, from the one with the.
That's the bit that the Christmas episodes and the first couple of episodes, bits that ended up with song and dance numbers in it. Yeah, I'll buy most things. It's like, well, the most amazing weird stuff happens in this show. It's like, but stopping and singing about it, I drew the line there. And then they had a whole episode where they kept on making Bridgerton references, and it's like, I haven't watched this show.
Yeah,
I've seen period drama before, but I don't know what's special about this one.
But no, he brought something quite different to the role in a good way. He brought his personality across, and I just think it worked really, really well, which is a shame that we only get sort of 2 seasons, 2 very short seasons of it as well.
Yeah. So there's obviously, it was front page news, what's now happened. I haven't caught up with it, so I don't know enough about it. And I'd be interested to see what is happening now. I don't know if she is properly the next Doctor, or what else might be happening.
Yes, I heard
big psych out.
To me, it's coming across as a bit of a gimmick, and she's not going to be it. That's what it's coming across. That's my initial feelings, but I could be totally wrong. And it's a bit annoying that the regenerations have now sort of turned into a bit of a gimmick, because it almost did last time as well, really. We had Tennant come back, and because they're making such a big thing of it. I know it, because I know I'm old, and I think of Tom Baker and Peter Davison and John Pertwee and stuff, but their regeneration, so much of it was a big thing because of the lack of social media and lack of everything under the spotlight. It wasn't as.
It was a shock.
It was a shock. You didn't know. I can remember watching Tom Baker going to Peter Davison, and I didn't have a clue it was even coming up.
Well, you think about it, there was a whole group of people who'd never seen one before, because he'd been Doctor Who for 6-7 years.
Yes, that was the thing, wasn't it? And so nobody expected it, and it just sort of happened. And because you didn't get everything under the spotlight, so people weren't getting little bits of information. And as a kid, I wasn't looking at social media because it didn't exist. So there was nowhere for me to get this information, bar the odd science fiction magazines that I were reading. And even they didn't get, most of that was sort of things like Starlog, and they didn't get stuff. And when they did get stuff, they never used to release spoilers before a program came out. All their stuff came out post whatever came out.
Yeah. You can read all about it next week in Looking.
Yeah. Good old Looking.
It's got 3D specs with it this episode.
Mm.
I can read my Terrorhawks comic strip in glorious 3 dimensions.
And then get a raging migraine afterwards, yes. But yes, have you heard of the Eye of Argon?
No.
It's meant
What's
to be
that?
the worst fantasy book ever written. It was written in 1970. I just looked it up again because I couldn't remember all things. And it was, it's a novella really by a guy called Jim Feast. And it was sort of released he was only about 14, 15 at the time. And he released a story about Gringo the Barbarian. It's meant to have the worst prose ever. I've got a copy of it, actually. And basically everybody decided this was the worst story ever. And in reality, what they came up is every time people were quoting it as the worst thing ever, and it would go to different fan conventions, and it went on for decades and decades. And basically, this guy was bullied to a point that the fact that he's never wrote anything after that. He was like a 14, 15-year-old guy trying to write something, and he released it, and he was really proud of it, and everybody slammed it down within sort of the fandom. And maybe he wouldn't have written anything else, but he had no sort of encouragement. He just sort of disappeared off it. And I've said I've got a copy of it. I've not read it yet because there was copies of it flying around at point because you can't buy it. But the little clips of the prose I read, yes, are pretty terrible. But he was a 14, 15-year-old kid. It's going to be terrible.
Yeah. I mean, there should be some duty of care there that he shouldn't have been published.
Yeah, well, I think it was self-published. Sort of, it was just like photocopied off and ended up at a fan convention or something.
Well, this is even worse when something gets vanity publishing.
And no, that's what
pushy
actually
parent
no.
publishing.
According to Wiki here, the work was first published in 1970 in a fanzine, but he was 16 at the time, and he was really, really proud of it. And basically, over the sort of decades, people sort of, this is the worst thing ever, and then people were do reenactments of it and laughing at it and stuff like this. And it was just literally, it was like the equivalent of social media bullying when you look at it, back at it.
This is the problem with these things. You know, the social media is used by people who are, by and large, unsociable, and culture wars are prosecuted by people with no concept of culture.
Yeah, but it's a quite interesting story, the whole story behind the thing, and I actually do want to read it, and I'm not expecting it to be good in that, but it's just quite interesting that somebody's obviously at that age was trying to do something and he was really, really proud of it, and then people just put it down. And that's always my thing about nobody really wants to write anything bad. You don't go out there to do that.
No, but what you wanted was some constructive criticism, perhaps.
Yeah, and somebody said, well, somebody could have said, oh yes, this could have been better if you'd done this, this, and this, and this could have been better in that way and that way. And I'm not, and I don't say that you should never be negative about stuff. I just think the way it's done, and I think that's always part of the problem. And that's, to me, I think the reason a lot of my focus is on older science fiction and older books, especially sort of around the sort of golden age and you hit into the 70s and stuff, is I think there was just a lot more freedom to to experiment without being told, no, that's not the way you do this, or you've got to hit this because that's the trend at the moment. And there was a lot more. If you see like writers, somebody like Philip Jose Farmer, his broad variety of the stuff he used to write about is all over the place. He sort of doesn't stick to one thing. Whereas nowadays his publishers would say, no, you stick in this lane, you've got to do this, this, and this. And I think that's part of the reason.
Thank God for pseudonyms.
Yeah, pseudonyms. I love discovering. I still find it amazing that after all these years, I'm still discovering writers that I knew nothing about that for some reason passed me over. I've read a couple of stories recently, Avram Davidson, and I don't know nothing about his novel output or anything like that. And he's another one I need to sort of look up. Who's quite.
Oh, here we go. That's handy. They're right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Phoenix and the Mirror.
Yeah.
And this is one I want to read.
Yeah.
All the Seas of Oysters. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, what's that title about? I
Yeah.
demand to know.
Nowadays, they wouldn't let him do a title like that.
No, you can't. You can't have something so abstract,
Obscure.
and
Yeah.
you can't have a failure either. This is the issue. You were given perhaps because the magazine market was a lot stronger. You had time to hone your skills there and to get it wrong, but you'd likely be writing under a pseudonym.
Yeah.
So when you finally expanded something into a novel format, you would actually know that something was already successful. I'm turning this short story into something bigger, or I've now had this idea, but I now know these editors or other writers, and I can get some advice and some guidance. Whereas now you seem to have to do a lot of self-care, a lot of self-editing, a lot of self-publicity, and basically you are a one-man band.
I think, a lot of the editors around that sort of time, if you could look, they sort of shaped the way, like obviously John Campbell shaped the way science fiction and even fantasy sort of moved its way forward. And you just think, what would it be like without that? But then there's the argument they may have had too much control. I've heard the argument that people like Paul Anderson had too much control over what was published, and in some ways, stuff that could have been published that was good didn't get published because he was editing stuff and would sort of turn stuff away.
But at that point, you had enough magazines
somebody you'd
around
find
that someone would probably have taken it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there must have been thousands of stories that never saw the light of day, and you would hope that lots of those never did for good reason. But, if they were rejected, hopefully they came back with a couple of pointers for what to do next time.
It's the short stories that I think disappear more than anything else from that sort of period. I was doing this thing that I'm doing on overpopulation, and I'm coming across the stories sort of start just after the war, and you go through the 40s and the 50s. It's when the stories on overpopulation sort of start proliferating. But there's a bunch of short stories that nobody's probably ever heard of that you find, and I'm trying to literally log them all. But there's even famous ones that apparently are famous I'd not heard of. Alice Glazer, The Tunnel Ahead, which you probably have heard of you?
No.
And this is so-called a very famous story about overpopulation, and it is a fantastic story, and it's quite haunting, and somebody even made a short film of it, a Czech short film of it that is actually on YouTube. That's really good, but it plays with stuff that you see people play with later, but they've obviously been inspired about it. But then short stories, I think, are more in danger of disappearing than a lot of novels. And it's quite a shame because so many were produced in sort of those periods, and less are produced now, or less are published now, I think, because there's less places to publish them. You can publish them yourself online, but there's less.
What is it? There are so many more places to publish them now, but no one's going to pay you, because if you are looking at something published, it's likely to be digitally, and people don't like to pay for stuff that they see on a screen.
Yeah. If you read some of Asimov's anthologies of short stories, and if you've got the intros in there, every intro one, he said, somebody asked me to write a story about this for this magazine, or somebody asked me to write a story for that magazine. So they've gone to him because he was well known at the time, but it shows that all the avenues that you could put your stories into. You know, or Playboy asked me to, do stories, and lots of weird ones. Weird magazines would ask for a science fiction story off Isaac Asimov just to put in there.
Why wouldn't you? I mean, you would want people to, buy this month's Reader's Digest or, Playboy, because you want to attract different kinds of audiences.
But there's just not that place for it. I've got a huge collection of Omni magazine, which was obviously science. It was aimed at men, because if you look at the adverts, it's all cigarettes and whiskey and cars and the odd bit of hi-fi equipment. That's all the adverts are in there.
But there's the hi-fi equipment is to give away.
Yeah. It's huge amounts of short stories and in there that some has got published, some not. You got famous ones like God Is an Iron by Spider Robinson first got published there. And then and I'm not sure that story would have got, if that story a similar sort of story came out now, I'm not sure anybody would publish it because of, especially in the States with the sort of stuff that's going on there now, would anybody publish something called God Is an Iron? Well, and if you read it, it's a grim story, though it has got some positivity at the end. But then and I said there's not places like Rollable Murder. That was published in what's the name of the magazine? The men's magazine,
Esquire.
Esquire. He found it for me. Yes. So Rollable Murder was originally published in Esquire, but I'm not sure those sort of magazines anymore take stories like that.
No, Cosmopolitan used to.
Yes, I remember.
Well, I mean, you know what? Their business model has just changed. Their audience has completely changed, presumably. Yeah. I would suggest their target audience has narrowed. You find the same with a lot of other magazines. They start as one thing, and you have to adapt or die. You don't. There's no licenses for life.
But the thing was, is they said, as you said, there used to be this place that you could publish all this stuff, and it wouldn't always be the obvious science fiction magazines. It would be in general population. As much as if you look back at that period and people say, "Oh, people look down on science fiction and stuff," but they couldn't have that much because it was getting published in Esquire and Cosmopolitan and Playboy and things.
All of the highbrow publications.
Yeah. And you get Western stuff. Westerns used to appear in weird places because I can remember.
Yeah, they'd be in All Story or Collier's. They'd be in the Slicks as well as the Pulps.
Mm.
It's funny when I find science fiction books written by people I didn't realize had written science fiction books.
Mm.
Robert Graves had 7 Days in New Crete. I haven't read it yet, but it's just like, well, wait a minute, when did you write science fiction? Sort of between Goodbye to All That and Before I Claudius, and it's just like he wasn't highbrow, but Ian Forster with The Machine Stops.
Yes.
LP Hartley. So from the In-Between, the Go-Between, not the In-Betweeners, the Go-Between. So sort of historical, rural type writing, followed up with, I can't remember the name of it, something about faces. Yeah, wrote a science fiction novel. It's you do occasionally get it. Kazuo Ishiguro has moved to that. You do still find authors, literary fiction authors have an idea. Doris did. Yeah. It shouldn't be a constraint.
Yeah, I would put authors like Jonathan Latham in that sort of thing. He writes science fiction, but then he doesn't always write it, and it's a lot more literary, even though I hate the term, than a lot of other science fiction. And he has written, I said, some of my favourite science. I said I don't follow a lot of modern science fiction. I don't read huge amounts of it, but his stuff and Kazuo Ishiguro's stuff, those are the ones that have appealed to me when I read them. Photosology of Jonathan Latham is one of my favourite books. It's just really, really, but it's all about these boys in Brooklyn who gain these powers, and it's all about Brooklyn. It's all about people in Brooklyn, and that's what it's really about. But it's just, I said, literally, but and Never Let Me Go. Never Let Me Go is a masterpiece. I really, really love that.
This is it. I've not read Ishiguro science fiction yet. I've read, Remains of the Day and Artist of the Floating World and things like that, but not the sci-fi.
Yeah, and I've got Clara and Son that I need to read.
Yeah, me too.
But Rosie, my wife, I need to she wants to hear it, so I've got to read it to her because she has problems reading because of a disability. So we're gonna sit down and I'm actually going to read it to her. Hopefully this year is the plan. But I'm quite excited to read that because of the whole concept of it and what I've heard about it. But his writing is just, I said, never let me go. It's just stunning. It really is. It's quite grim, quite stunning. And actually, I love the film. Have you seen the film of it at all?
No.
I
don't want to watch the film until I've read the book.
No, I went to see the film. I went to see the film and I didn't know about the book. And we saw the film. And so we didn't know what the little twist was, even though it's not a big twist. And if you know about it, it doesn't matter. But we didn't even know about that. And that's what impacted. And said, I saw that. And then I thought, oh, I have to read the book. And he said he's one of these authors that managed to straddle the lines really well out of the modern sort of writers.
Yeah. Doesn't change his name to do it either.
No, he just does it and people accept it. But then you get to this famous thing that another term that I dislike is speculative fiction. Because all fiction is speculative. It's just a pointless term, really.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of it. But you get authors who play on that because they don't want to be known as science fiction writers. Margaret Atwood is the most obvious one. That she doesn't like to be known. Hello. Sorry, if you're listening, I'm being a more by Sharpay. Hello. What do you want? You bored now? You bored?
That's a definite I want something face.
You want something? What do you want? But yes, Margaret Atwood always plays on the fact that she doesn't write science fiction. And it's just like, nah, you write science fiction.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do. Just admit it.
Embrace it.
Yeah. And as good as it is, it can come across a little preachy at points, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, but if only we paid attention.
Yes. I read... when did I read
she does have the luxury of being correct.
Yeah, that's the problem. I read A Handmaid's Tale. When did I read Handmaid's Tale? Probably late 80s, first time I read it. And you think... yeah, and then they had the film that came out with Liam Neeson's... Was it Liam Neeson's wife? Who sadly died in that skiing accident.
Neve Cusack? Neve?
No, Natasha.
Oh, yeah, no, Natasha. Yeah. Oh, you have to cut this bit out as well.
Yeah.
I want to say Natasha Richardson. Is that right?
Yes, it is Natasha Richardson. Yeah, she died in a skiing accident. I'm pretty sure she's the main one in the film of it that was produced at the time, back in the 80s, 1990s. And I remember the film being pretty good, actually, but it's not as... The bits I've seen of the TV series, it's almost felt like the Saw torture porn at the points. It is so grim, but then it would be grim.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be happy clappy.
It's not supposed to be happy, but as you said, it's quite scary how, yes, it's obviously not gone that far, but how stuff in the States has changed, and you can understand why people are drawing parallels with it. Totally get it. We were vaguely talking about events, and I just thought I'd just sum up the other ones. I said there was Big Book Summer. It's going on through the summer. We've got Garb August coming up. And is there anything else I mixed? Rocket Summer.
Rocket Summer.
Does that cover the whole of the summer, does it?
No, that is just July. So it's quite a tight little event.
Is that just Golden?
It chunks down to weeks. It is Golden Age science fiction. So
it's Golden Age, yeah.
Week 1 is anything before 1940. Week 2 is the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. So I'm going to probably focus a lot on short stories for that. Also the Richard Shaver thing, which is mostly 40s based. A few novels thrown in as well. But, yeah.
Luckily, a lot of novels at that time are quite short. Novels have definitely got longer over the years. I think there's a point about the back end of the 70s that they just started to expand slowly.
I think they could. I think the construction of books became better, and I think the editing got a bit more lax, and some authors just got more power.
Yeah. Because you've got Philip K. Dick. He never wrote a book over... Let's have a look at my... Philip K. Dick was over... Yeah, I don't think there's a story of his much over 200 pages. It really isn't. But he managed to condense all the ideas and totally overwhelm people in that amount of space. But he was through all that period. But as you said, the author got lax, and then you get onto all the fantasy epics that every after sort of Lord of the Rings, everything had to be. I think it's worse now. Everything has to be trilogies and 10 books.
I mean, yeah, this is it. It's not just books, is it? I mean, your average film was hour and 40, 25 years ago. It's now
2 hours, 2 hours 15,
sometimes 3. It's getting. This is again people going for getting my sort of values worth, but it's becoming a little, it's a little bit indulgent, which is odd because there is no more sort of alterness left in cinema, in mainstream cinema.
I remember watching in what year would that have been? 2004. Phone Booth. Colin Farrell stars in it. Can't remember the director off the top of my head.
That's a short film.
And that is an hour and 10 minutes, I think, or an hour and 20 at most. And it's just a man in a phone booth, basically. And I remember, because I've got the Blu-ray of it, and there's some behind-the-scenes stuff, and it was people trying to get him to make the film longer. The director, and nope, it's that length. That's what I'm doing. That length. And it works, and you got nice contained. It's, as you said, there's no worth. Films do not have to be over 2 hours, and half the time of films you think, God, you just need a good bloody editor. Bring that down and you'd have a fantastic film.
Who benefits from it being longer? I don't get it.
I think you want people to think they've got their money's worth. It's
and that could be that must be the only thing, because it doesn't suit the film company, because every minute of the film is going to cost thousands, sometimes millions more.
It's almost like this post-credit scene thing that Marvel do. It's now, as what once was a sort of misnomer, occasionally it would happen. Now everybody expects it. And if Marvel didn't do it, or somebody didn't do it, they feel that people were disappointed, so they've got to the point. But then in some ways, was it a video or something? Might have been Patrick Willems. Don't know if you've seen any of his stuff. He does a lot of stuff on media and films and stuff. He did a video a few months ago about end credit scenes and saying you're basically ruining the end of the film, because you're getting to the point that you're saying that the film's not finished because it's a bit after the credits.
Yeah.
So you've actually ruined the end of the film. And I thought that's actually quite a good argument. And I think it's all about worth. So the films have got longer. And in some ways, the books, you want people to feel like they get value for their money, which is why everything is now a trilogy or 6 books or 10 books. But it used to be that people used to write long books and long epics because that's what the story required. Like the reason the Wheel of Time is 13 or 14 books is because Robert Jordan at the time thought it needed that, not because he was doing it to market it. There's lots of arguments.
Maybe someone could have talked him out of that, because I'm sure it doesn't need all of that space.
No. I've not read them all. I've only read the first one, and I really enjoyed it. But from what I've heard, is that later on you think maybe they should have cut this down a bit or dropped a load of stuff out.
I've read the first one, and I think you can easily drop 100 pages from that.
Yeah, you probably could actually. But then you get the author special editions. Stephen King's The Stand, the newer version, as much as it adds more sort of modern references into it, I would argue that
the Stephen King inspired his editor version. Yeah.
I read the earlier version when I read it, because I'm sorry, it's better. Raymond Feist's Magician, that's got a so-called author preferred edition. It's got 100 pages, and those 100 pages add nothing to the plot at all. They're like little bits that you could have. Tolkien would have put them in the appendices, basically.
Yeah.
So you don't have to read them. And you get all these authors' preferred editions. But surely the original book should be the authors. It's like director's cuts of films. Surely the director's cut should be the first one that you release. The one that the director.
Well, I mean, how many versions of Blade Runner have we had?
God.
I mean,
I think it
went 6. On and on.
But I'm a misnomer, and I think that the best version is the theatrical cut, much to everybody's amaze, because maybe it's because that's what I saw in the cinema when it came out.
Yeah, sometimes these studio execs might know something.
Yeah,
I know the sort of received wisdom is they don't. But
Rosie, my wife, is younger than me, and she'd never seen it, and I showed her the original director's cut which is, well, that's one of the many cuts of it. And she watched it and said, "Oh, is that it?" Sort of thing. And then a couple of years later, I showed her the theatrical cut, which is the one I'd always go back to. And she goes, I get it now. That makes perfect sense. And I've always had the argument over that is the reason people go to the final cut or director's cuts and what have you is because they know what the story is before they go into it. Whereas if, as I did when I went into the cinema to see it when it was released, knew nothing about it by the fact that Harrison Ford was in it and it was a science fiction film, the sort of noirish over-talking made sense at the time because we knew nothing about it. And nowadays, people go into the film and they know the plot before they've even seen it.
Yeah.
So that's why these director's cuts and that. And I think that happens with quite a few films and stuff. These director's cuts are more made not to improve the older film, but to tell the story that people want to see. Does that make sense?
Well, and also to make the people that are the established fan base buy it again.
Yeah.
So, this is, unfortunately, it's, Blade Runner with sprayed edges.
Yeah. But it's the thing, like, as you said, maybe these studio execs know what they're talking about, some of them, as much as some of it's done for marketing, but years ago, they used to, it's the same with book editors. The reason book editors help is they can overview your stuff and say, that's just too wordy. Cut that bit out, And
yeah, it will happen to anybody. If you are writing something, if you're making the film, if you're living and breathing it day in, day out, someone, fresh pair of eyes, comes in and says, you know what, that bit doesn't actually work, or would it not be better if that segued into, this other thing? Or an editor comes along and saves a film, which, happens probably more often than you'd think. Well, film should be a collaborative effort.
That's the whole point of it, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. That's why they give out 15 different awards and not just one.
Yeah. It always amazes me that any film gets made if you see what goes into them. You just think, how did this end up on screen and made sense with all that going on?
Yeah. Well,
put all that together.
If the production falls apart, the director gives the blame, even though it might be the producer that's at fault. Yeah. If everyone says how beautiful it looks, the director gets all the praise, even though you really should be shaking the hand of the cinematographer. Yeah. It's again, we're back to that visible face of the product. So if a film really bombs, the director can go on and make another film. Potentially, the star might not be able to star in another film again.
Anyway, so off we went down that one again. So Rocket Summer. And I said there's a Steinbeck event going on at the moment to read Steinbeck over the next 3 months, which I'm trying to, but it's having time to at the moment to fit it. I was trying to read 100 pages a week of The Grapes of Wrath, and I failed the first week because I got waylaid.
I haven't started The Grapes of Wrath yet. Hopefully that comes in the next week.
I've ended up going down westerns, and
Grapes of Wrath is a western.
I'm trying to work out whether Zorro counts as a western.
Zorro absolutely counts as a western.
Okay, I can read that. I've been meaning to read that.
You don't have to be a cowboy. It's set in the West.
Yeah.
He is, someone going around doing, heroic things and good deeds.
I've been meaning to read that for years. So,
I
have memories of the Disney produced TV series of it that was repeated in the 70s a lot.
I had a little sword with a piece of chalk on the end so you could put the Z.
So I think we will wrap it up there unless you have anything you wish to add, Gavin?
No.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll cover more stuff off next month.
Yes, hopefully the plan is going forward is the beginning of the month, so within the second week of the month, we hopefully release an episode, barring Gavin's schedule and my schedule, and hopefully be a little more consistent, because I think, not that Gavin's not busy, but he's got more consistent times than Al had the past few months, which would be good. Hopefully Al may reappear as a guest star at some point when he's back doing some Booktube stuff, and when his schedule has settled down a little bit. But we will see. But no matter what, we will be here. And I said, any questions or anything you'd like us to talk about, please feel free and leave some comments below. We'll still go. Anyways, you can catch up with Gavin on just type in genre books and he'll be top of your list. I'm sure he will. And he will reappear, but I'll put a link below here if you're listening to this on YouTube. And I said in the future, hopefully this will go up other places, but I've got to sort all that out yet. It's all getting very complex. More complex than I wanted. Anyway, so bye for now.
Bye.
This is a journey into sound